Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. Let's talk a little bit about living. I've noticed, and I'm sure you have too, that there are many people alive today who are busy trying to live without actually living at all. They are not conscious in the present moment. They are not conscious in their decision making. They have no awareness of what they are doing when they are doing it. Okay? And instead, everyone's sort of just looking for this escapism. They want to escape from life, from who they are, from themselves, from everything. And you can see this being a prevalent motif in arenas of technology. And you can also see it in other areas as well. Okay? Why is this? What is so unbearable about living? What is so unbearable about living that people aspire to escape it? Well, you have to understand that living entails pain and suffering. And I've talked about this many times in different contexts. That's a part of existence. And suffering, oddly enough, if it's handled properly, if it's handled consciously, helps you as a human being to transcend, to become more whole within yourself. Okay? Because we're all of us, in many respects, searching for that. And we are not told, or rather that it is hidden from us, that we are an expression of the universe. We are individual expressions of the universe. Okay? This is not some sort of poetic statement. It's not metaphorical. It is a fact. It is a reality. And in every domain of science, true science, this is recognized. But again, what has happened is that true science has been replaced with pseudosciences that purport to tell you the answers to your existential questions, but never really address them. And incidentally, even true science can't fully address them. For that you need philosophy. But the thing to point out here is that every ship needs a captain. You are a vessel, okay, through which things manifest, through which that which the universe puts into play manifests. All the various energies and thought forms and potentials and probabilities, you see, all of that is manifest in the things which exist. As I say though, every ship needs a captain. You're a vessel, so who's the captain of this ship? It's your conscious self. Consciousness. Now, every captain needs a compass. Right? We're not born into this life with an instruction manual. That doesn't happen, sadly. The best that we have are the lessons of our ancestors, those that came before. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. Okay, but we have ignored the lessons of history, we have ignored the lessons of our ancestors to our detriment. And we have become disconnected, discombobulated. Now, these are tumultuous times. And in some ways, we've always lived in tumultuous times in one way or another. Because there is always uncertainty. But beyond uncertain seas lies the undiscovered country, as Shakespeare called it, the unknown, the unseen. That is to say, the future. And to reach it, you need a map. You need a map, you need a compass, and you need a key to understand the map. And those exist because many thinkers and prominent philosophers and spiritualists and a variety of people have come along to offer their answers. And some of those might help you. Some of them might not. Some of them might not even be applicable anymore. Okay? But you have to find what works for you. I'll give you a sort of practical example of this to solidify it in your mind, an analogous example. You might have 20 blenders in a kitchen showroom, okay? But each of them works differently, and each of them has a different instruction manual. One instruction manual may not necessarily work for another type of blender. Okay, I say this because I was out buying a blender this morning. But that aside, the point being that even if you get the wrong instruction manual, there are some things in there that you can use. There will be some similarities. I hope you understand what I'm saying here. The biggest mistake we make as human beings is to think that we have to live up to certain expectations that are artificial, that are placed on us by ourselves sometimes or by other people. But what you'll find is that if you simply let yourself be, the whole business of living becomes simpler. We are all much too preoccupied, too concerned with how other people perceive us. And this is because there are innate instincts to be accepted, to make an impression, to be this unrealistic, palatable image of what we wish we were. We conjure these mental projections based on our thinking, our inner, sometimes subjective thinking, completely subjective thinking of what other people want us to be. But in doing that, we fail to be palatable to ourselves. Right? Because we're trying too hard to be this thing which we aren't. We are not being true to ourselves. And again, to thine own self be true. It's one of the most important phrases ever written, ever uttered. So when we're busy trying to measure up to someone else's yardstick or even our own, this produces feelings of self-loathing, of unworthiness, and we begin to cast judgment upon ourselves. And this most ghastly judgment from ourselves, pronounced upon ourselves, causes us to self-murder our souls. We end up damning ourselves to a state of perpetual suffering. Right? Because we're too busy trying to be something, instead of just being what we are, who we are. And so we lose all sense of our identity. On the subject of identity, let me say this. For millennia, mankind has cut itself to ribbons in an effort to eviscerate the self. This is the self-murder that I was talking about. And then in comes this very strange desire that arises in us to be subsumed into a bigger collective. And we do this for safety. The need for safety is strong in those people that are weak, by the way. It's an act of extreme cowardice, in my opinion, but, fear makes people do stupid things. The real act of courage, in many respects, is to stand apart, to individuate, to say, do no harm, and to know thyself. But this path of travel isn't really for the timid, and many, many people today are very, very timid. And we see this reflected again in many spheres. And it expresses itself politically. It expresses itself economically. It expresses itself in ways that we sometimes don't even fully acknowledge or understand. And there are those people that have, in recent times, over the last months or years, I've noticed a distinct upsurge in this. There are those folks that measure themselves against the yardstick of intelligence, of intellect. We're not talking about true intelligence here, incidentally. Okay? But this idea that having a higher intellect, having a higher intelligence quotient, is the same thing as having wisdom is wholly wrong, is wholly flawed. And I've had to frequently point this out, that just because you have a higher IQ, that doesn't mean that you are a wise person. I know plenty of people with high IQs that are the most unwise people, most unsavory people that you're ever likely to meet. Nor is there any credible scientific evidence that possessing a higher IQ actually leads to virtue. Right? No one is led to virtue merely by their intellect. The intellect is just a tool, like a hammer or a spanner. And so this idea that has come about for various reasons, many of which are enormously complex, but this idea that a human life, the value of a human life, is measured by its practical usefulness. I think this is at the core of many of the dangerous ideas and ideologies that have proliferated over time. You can see this in Marxism, for example, or communism proper, let's say, in which there's this notion that to each according to his needs and from each according to his means. Right? And you see this again in varying forms through these man-made religions. In Islam, this is also very prevalent because all of these institutions of religion, all of the institutions of religion are devoid of spirituality. You'll notice this in today's time, by the way. They've ripped that out of them. These puppet masters that I've so often spoken about, but also humanity in general has rejected its own spiritual core for the reasons we said. So that happened. But these institutions have become so focused on the material worldview, that they have lost sight of that which is numinous, of that which is greater. But the value of a human life isn't measured by its practical usefulness. It's measured by whether or not that human being acts in accordance with and respects natural law, respects the natural rights that are bestowed on people. Right? And that happens, we are given these rights from birth, such as life, liberty, and property. We don't choose to have them, we're born with them. But what happens again over time is that because people don't understand this, they are consumed by envy and greed. Now, the problem with the world today is that the greedy don't understand the importance of giving, whilst those that are impoverished and those folks that are, let's say, champagne socialist types, they feel envious. Right? They feel envious, and they also go further to say that what is not theirs to give should be taken by violence to give to others. You don't have a right in any way, shape or form. It can't be logically argued that you have a right to take what is not yours, to distribute. Meanwhile, the people that do have, or perhaps have too much in many regards, don't understand at all why it is healthy for them and necessary to give. Do you see what I'm saying? Hoarding, accumulation of extreme amounts of wealth, does nothing. Now, Adam Smith noticed this, He wrote about it in The Wealth of Nations. Many other prominent thinkers have talked about it as well. And some not-so-great thinkers like Karl Marx wrote about it in Das Kapital. But the fact of the matter is that wealth needs to circulate. Okay, otherwise it's not doing anything. It's just there as a thing in and of itself. And also over time, economically what has happened, and I've talked about this as well, is that money was replaced with currency, which is a completely different kettle of fish. And so you see this currency manipulation, these currency explosions. I've actually done a whole presentation on this, everything that's wrong with the economy. But be that as it may, these forms of thinking that arise in us, that are profoundly damaging, end up seizing control of our bodies, of our physical being, of our minds. This is what is commonly known as possession. Okay? When our instincts are out of control, when our animal self, let us call it, because let's face it, whichever way you look at it, at the base level, we are animals. We're also much more than that. See, this is the lie that is perpetuated, especially in Satanism and other types of, other forms of this kind of thinking, the social Darwinism, is that mankind, human beings, are only animals. This is not so. This is not remotely so. This is a blatant lie, or at least it's a half-truth. At best, it's a half-truth. We are affected by our instincts. We are pushed by certain desires that arise from our biological imperatives. But that's not all we are. Okay, and this is a mistake that many, many people make. They always seem to think that only that is the bulk of knowledge about human beings. Only that applies. It doesn't. There's much more to you as a person. I am telling you this. There is much more to you than what you have been told by these priests. Okay, these so-called educators that are actually mostly there to prevent you learning about yourself, or perhaps they themselves are ignorant. This happens also. Now, there's another thing that needs to be said with regards to all of this. Now, I've talked before about how we are all living under tyranny in the present times. Okay? And tyranny arises because we allow it to some degree. That doesn't mean that it's all on our shoulders, by the way. There are many people pushing and peddling this nonsense as well, that it's all your fault. I've talked about this. I've said, look, how on earth can you be held responsible for things that were put into play decades before you were born? You can't. Right? Or how on earth can morons suggest that only you should carry that burden. Many things are not your fault. Many states of suffering which arise because of circumstance are not your fault. The way that things play out before you even come into this world is not your fault. And you would end up in a state of infinite regression, which is coherent enough, but still it presents problems like this notion of where you place the blame. Do you place it at the feet of your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, whatever? How far back do you go for this? Right back to the first human beings, maybe. Perhaps there's the origin of original sin, the notion of it. But even there, misinterpretations, misunderstandings. It's a horrible, horrible time that we're living in, because there's nothing but confusion out there. And too many people are confused because they're looking externally for the answers. Everything I'm telling you is come through me, from within me. It hasn't come from external places. Okay? And again, I've already talked about this. But this idea of infinite regression, taking it way back to way back when, is silly. But we are responsible for the things that we do as individuals and sometimes as societies today, right here, right now. And that is what people are trying to escape from. We were talking about escapism earlier. That's what people are trying to escape from. You see, the masses right now, it's a very strange thing, they're looking for absolution. And you'll say to me, how can this be? This is why they keep running to spiritual teachers, to gurus, to the New Age movement, to sages. They're running to anyone and everyone, the wise and the unwise. They're running to them looking for absolution. They're seeking forgiveness. Because they know that their own actions or their inactions have actually enslaved them, or at least have helped to enslave them. You see, what people don't realize is that they have given their vocal or silent consent to living under tyranny. And for that, they bear some responsibility. This current state of affairs. Now, what happens is they can't reconcile it with themselves. That's the ugly part of their individual self. And it's driving them to madness. It's driven them to madness. And this is what's going on. This is exactly why people want to escape themselves. Because at some level within, they're putting up with tyranny. And it doesn't just happen on a governmental level or something like this. It happens sometimes even on the familial level, where you might have an overbearing parent, an overbearing mother or a father, the devouring mother, as Jordan Peterson puts it, okay, or the tyrannical father. That's just not necessarily metaphorical, but also it can be the literal truth. For a lot of people, it's the literal truth. Because parents, this is where oftentimes it begins. Parents start putting all these expectations on their children without teaching them why certain things may be right or wrong. They certainly don't teach them what a right is or what a wrong is. And in fact, oftentimes, they perpetrate wrong actions against their own children. Some parents are violent towards their children. Some parents do other kinds of horrendous things to their children, and especially in today's time, and then they try and justify it. And the fact of the matter is that, again, somewhere in their mind, they despise or dislike their children. But children don't just end up being unlikable just by accident. Right? That happens because the parents have not contributed to their growth in a proper way. They have not nurtured the spirit of the child, or the physical being of the child, or the mind. And so, of course, you're going to get, kids that are out of control. And all these diagnoses of ADHD and ADD and whatever else. This is because of this lack of proper parental attention and care. So these are very, very serious issues, this inability of people to parent properly. But the ones that do, well, their children end up okay. But the problem for them is the right-minded people, or even those that are damaged through circumstance but become right-minded through their own efforts, which does happen, they then look at this world and they say, well, am I insane because the rest of the world seems like it's just, gone bananas? And they want to retreat from that. Because it's a scary thing to face this complete madness out there. But the thing is, you still have to do that. You still have to face it with some sort of courage, voluntarily, on your own time, in your own way. You have to find a way of doing that. And it isn't easy. It isn't easy at all. But you don't do it through, and this is again something I would scold a lot of so-called teachers, let's say, for. Okay, I would scold them for this. For suggesting that you require force to manifest any kind of change. No, you don't. Okay, the idea that you need to use force, brute force or some other form of force to overturn this state of tyranny, that doesn't work. All that produces is violent revolution. And the violent revolutions produce more violent revolutions, and so on. Ad infinitum, it never stops. But the true path towards change, to opposing tyranny, believe it or not, is to simply be, and be truthful to who you are, and stand with courage for what you stand for, providing that it's in the moral right, which is to say that it doesn't violate anyone else's rights. And champions the rights of others. So many people, however, don't do that. You see, again, this is the madness of our times. Everyone's playing the blame game. Everyone is at it. Because they are that discombobulated. They have zero clue about what's really going on. In themselves, out there, they have no conception of it. But, as I say, if people just took that time to be, to nurture their inner being, their creativity, their abilities, whatever they may be, and everyone has one, incidentally. See, this is another thing that these extreme left-brained or extreme right-brained people won't tell you. They make it out as if, oh, you know what, we everything's predestined. This is also another piece of garbage, incidentally. Oh, it's predestined to be this way. It's all deterministic. Bollocks. If there's one thing that the true sciences of today tell us, be it in the field of quantum mechanics or physics, biology, chemistry, whichever of these you look at, it is that not everything is predeterministic. Yes, there are certain factors. Yes, there are certain things, the circumstances which have happened before, which will limit the choices that you can make, which will limit the probabilities and outcomes. But that doesn't mean that that's all there is. It's not all predetermined, right? And this is another piece of garbage, as I say. Nothing is predetermined. It doesn't have to work out the way that you're told it has to. That's a nonsense. But as I say, people are busy trying to play the blame game. And how does this factor into what I was talking about? Well, it doesn't take a genius to work that out, does it? You've got people playing identity politics. Let's blame this group or that group or the other group. Let's foist guilt upon them. This is the infinite regression nonsense I was speaking about. You'll see this, by the way, and this is especially pronounced with social justice warrior types. Let's blame somebody's ancestors for all this, but also blame them for it. Right? Let's blame somebody for what their ancestors did. So this shaming, this guilt. Let's say with the institution of slavery that existed, which was incidentally torn down by Wilberforce, but let's go with that. If you are living in America today and you're a white person, okay, we'll use the label white because the identity politics, people who play that game, they want to use it. Okay, let's say that's the case, because I just see people as individuals. And I base my judgments around their actions as individuals, sometimes as groups if they are collectivists themselves. Okay, but let's leave that aside. So, if you've got somebody, for the sake of argument here, for brevity, someone who's white, whose ancestors owned slaves, black slaves in America. Well, it's a fair point to make that that is wrong. It's a moral wrong. I don't care how you try and justify that. There's no possible way you can unless you're a complete lunatic. Unless you are so detached from humanity that you think it's okay to excuse that. But let's say, all sane, right-minded people would condemn that. Good, as they should. They should also be condemning the Islamic slave trade that went on in the Islamic Empire, because those folks took a whole lot of black slaves out of Africa. Many of them were killed, castrated, right? But anyway, so let's see, in this case, in this example that we're choosing, that occurs. Can you blame the descendant of that person for that? Apparently, according to this Marxist indoctrination, yes. Now, I don't understand that argument. I can understand that argument because I think it's nonsense. Because the little child that's born, because we're all born as children, as babies, right, had no say in what their ancestors did. And this nonsense of privilege. These are 3 words to watch out for, by the way. If you ever catch anybody using these terms, you know for a fact that they are quite probably wrong-headed and ignorant. Okay? Terms like patriarchy. Terms like white privilege. Okay? These kind of things. When you see people using those terms, you know for a fact that they are completely in the moral wrong, because what they're trying to do is foist upon individuals alive today the sins of their fathers or their. Do you see what I'm saying? Original sin. And that does no one any good. It doesn't address the proper real concerns that the descendants of the slaves might have. It doesn't address the proper concerns that the descendants of slave owners might have had. Right? Doesn't do any of that. All it does is create division, anger, hatred, resentment, you name it. That's identity politics. Okay, but this notion of privilege, that people have benefited from that, right, through the generations, this is a nonsense. Why is it a nonsense? I don't care whether somebody says it's white privilege, black privilege, Pakistani privilege, Saudi Arabian privilege, Japanese privilege. It's all garbage. If it's used in the contexts that the Marxists use it in. This is one thing you have to learn. Because I see people who think, and this is part of the reason why I don't talk to certain people once I see this in them. You see people who think who think in extraordinarily racist ways and they don't notice it. Who think in collectivist ways and they don't notice it. I'm bringing it to your attention. Those people, by the way, probably know who they are because they watch these videos. They'll get angry about this video quite possibly. But I don't care. Still the truth. You're carrying racism within you. You're carrying hatred within you. For, you're collectivizing people. You're putting individuals into a collective and saying that collective and all the individuals that comprise of it are responsible for sins that were committed hundreds of years ago. What a nonsensical way to live. And I see these people carrying this nonsense and it translates into their work. It translates into what they're trying to do. And they claim to be spiritually aware or awake. And I look at these people like they're off their fucking nut. Because they haven't fully understood what is happening in this world of ours. They haven't understood what's going on even within themselves to a greater level or in a deeper, more meaningful way. You have to understand the dynamics of power in a real sense. There are people out there, and it's a very small number of people, but there are people out there that want power for only power's sake, and they are trying to mold everybody else into being the same as them through various means, by absorbing and imbibing these ideologies into themselves, which creates a psychotic personality. Right? But they have this outlook. They have this crazed outlook. They just want power for power's sake. Now, I'll be the first one to tell you this. Anyone who just wants power for power's sake knows nothing about power. And you say to me, how can you say that? Because these people seem to be very powerful. No, they're not. That's just an outward appearance. Remember, we were talking about that, this projection, this mental projection. That's what's going on. Those people are less powerful than people think they are. Yes, they have the false authority to launch bombs, missiles, whatever else, to command people in governments to do that. They're murderers. But being a murderer is not having power. Okay? And some might say, well, they have power over life and death then. They can instill fear in people with that. Yeah, kind of, but not really. Because life and death even are far more complex. And laws of karma certainly do exist. no matter how much people who wish to perpetrate evil want to ignore that or to minimize it, you know? Doesn't work that way. So, having this acceptance of self, to bring it back to what I was talking about, is essential to truly living. Okay, having an acceptance of who you are and what you've done and what you think, and understanding also that it's not your fault that you were indoctrinated with a whole lot of this stuff. Because when you're living in ignorance, and there was a time I was, okay, when you're living in that state of ignorance, you don't know. You don't realize that your actions or your words, in certain respects, when they're misused, are harmful. Does that mean we should run around policing it all through government? No. That's the worst thing you can do. But awareness of our own actions is better. Awareness of what we're saying, what we're doing from ourselves. Being conscious of it. And the effects that might produce. And if they're in accordance with freedom, then they are always the right words to say. And they're always the right actions to pursue. And if they're anti that ultimate tenet, let's say, of freedom, that principle, then they're always the wrong thing to do and say. You know, but freedom has to be viewed in context as well. It doesn't just mean, well, you know, you are free to do as you choose, absolutely. You can do a right or a wrong action. But be advised, there are consequences in this life for your actions, even your thoughts and speech. There are consequences for all of these things. And you must know what they are before you embark on any path. But again, as I say, too many people don't know this stuff, right? They don't understand. And what happens is, because of half-truths that have been dispensed to them through these false authority figures, they only have half the picture. So they go off half-cocked, literally. You know, to regurgitate this, whatever it is, that they've been told by one side or another side, just to further the political divide, to create dichotomies which don't really exist in any real sense, in any real meaningful way, or that can't really address the central issue. How do you address, let's use the subject we were talking about with slavery, how do you address that in a meaningful way today? Well, you might want to think about doing that in context, because there is a real live slave trade going on right now in Libya, for example. So if you truly care about slavery, you might want to bring that up in your discussion about the effects of slavery as well. Or other types of people trafficking and things that are going on in the current time. And you can discuss those in that context also. There's no reason why you can't. On the subject of police brutality, that does happen as well. But you have groups like Black Lives Matter suggesting that it only affects and predominantly affects one community, or one group of people, or one collective. No, this is a concern for everyone. You can't appropriate problems, especially societal problems. You can't appropriate them and say, well, this is our problem. No, so you see, if there's brutality going on and misuse of power by the apparatus of the state, which is what the police are. That's an issue for the whole of a society, not just one segment of it. Because if they can do it to one person, they will do it to any other person. And they have done, and they do it all the time. I'm just pointing something out. It's a human problem. You know, but again, this nonsense of appropriating things for political purposes, turning things into a political football, is insane. People do it all the time. And it happens because of the reasons we've talked about. I guess it happens at the end of the day because people don't understand Christ consciousness. Right? And I don't mean this in a religious context. But too many people really don't understand what that means. Even Christians don't understand what this means in Western tradition. I'm going to give you a direct parallel, if I may, from Hindu mythology. In India, in Hinduism, there are many godheads which serve as archetypes. Okay, many of them, hundreds of them actually. Krishna is one avatar of Vishnu, and he is the playful, mischievous musician, a symbol of divine love which recognizes human life as sacred, as a reflection of the divine. And he also represents inner peace and order established through true care. The principle of that. That is what Christ consciousness really is, and you'll find those same motifs, those same values in authentic, original Christian ideas. You'll find them there. You know, and you'll find it in the Bhagavad Gita as well, which emphasizes the importance of human freedom and choice and one's responsibilities towards the self and towards others. These ideas, these philosophies, help you to navigate the ethical and moral dilemmas of human life. Because you're starting with the principle that love is the law, love under will. You're starting with that principle, that love for yourself and then externally, outwardly towards your family, towards your children, towards your society. Yeah, love it has to be the cornerstone. Because it also entails care and concern. And love does not act from a place of fear. In fact, to love takes courage. To do what needs to be done. See, that's the thing. But you won't hear that too often. You know, but these are the things. I mean, to really live, to properly live, it means to really be at peace within yourself. But you can't be at peace within yourself if all these external influences that teach you the wrong things keep invading your mind in an effort to make you possessed, in an effort to steal your soul from you. You know, it's the murder of the soul, as I was saying, when you hold yourself up to these expectations of other people, of governments, you know, even with men and women. I'll say this before I close off, because I've talked quite a bit here. It's, you know, been about an hour almost, 50 minutes. But even with men and women, you get this thing where men are always trying, right, and I guess this is kind of, again, innate to a greater or lesser extent. Men are always trying to impress women. Why? That never works. It really doesn't work. Especially in today's times. And on the other side of that coin, women are always trying to impress men. Well, the men you end up with, if you do that, really don't have any value. They don't have any real meaningful, they don't have anything meaningful from themselves to share with yourself as a woman. So you end up with a sorry lot in real terms. So stop trying to impress anyone. Start accepting yourself and accepting other people with all their foibles. That's a very hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do because we human beings are always pushing everybody else's buttons. And learning how not to do that, or to come to some sort of arrangement where that's not the case, and to be, to really pay attention to people. That's a skill that you actually have to spend a long time learning. But again, it's part of just being. I say to people who want to, there's a lot of people that ask me how they should go about doing a particular thing, whatever it may be. And I tell them, just listen. And they don't, this strikes them as odd, because it's like, what do you mean? And I tell them, just listen. Sit and listen. Okay, just be silent and listen. And everything that you want to know, that you need to know, people will tell you about themselves, about, their jobs, about work, about anything. Just sit and listen. And you will learn an endless amount about people. And you'll be able to discern and make judgments about whether these people are good for you, or whether you want them around you or not. Are they going to, but what do I mean by that? Well, are they going to help you to aspire to do great things, or are they going to try and hold you back? Are they going to be like the crabs in a barrel? You can see which kinds of people are like that and which are not, if you just pay attention and listen. But today's times are very noisy, aren't they? There's all this noise going on in our heads, in our lives, with all this consumerism, with all this media that we consume. We're not really getting a chance to we don't really get the chance to know ourselves. And we also don't get the chance, I don't think, to listen to the voices of our ancestors, or the warriors of old, or the wise men. Because, like I said before once, your ideas are not your own. My ideas are not my own. We are vessels through which these ideas are communicated, but the ideas themselves are ages old. They're not new. They're quite ancient, actually. There's no such thing as a brand new idea. There'll be people that try and convince you there is, but that's actually just nonsense. There's no such thing as a brand new idea. What happens is that you can create something brand new as a result of cobbling together ideas which already exist. But is that idea in and of itself new? No, It's just a composition, a unique composition of all that was before. That's what happens in music, it's what happens in art, it's also what happens in technological terms. Take a look into the life of Steve Jobs if you really want to learn about that. You know, the way that he took what was already there and somehow managed to transform it all into something marketable. And what happens is clever people like Mr. Jobs or Bill Gates or whoever else, or people that are the heads of designer houses or whatnot, know how to tap into our consuming instincts, our need to consume these things, which then make us look a certain way to other people. That's what happens. These corporations sell you a lifestyle, but it's a fake lifestyle. But they know that you want that, so they sell you it. And they know ways to make you want that even more. So I find that the best way to approach life is to shun all of that. That's just my way of doing things, but you know, maybe it won't work for you, I don't know. But as far as I can see, shunning that artificial life in favor of real living, that's probably the only really sensible way to go about things. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there for this video. But I want to thank you very much for watching. I hope you have an excellent day. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.